as Karine noted, there has been a response from Hamas to the hostage deal. We're currently reviewing that response, and we're discussing it with our partners in the region. Director Burns, as you know, is there, and he's working this in real time on the ground. I won't be able to comment any further on this until we know where things stand. I hope you can understand that. I know everybody's curious about what's in this response, what the Israeli reaction to it is. I'm just not going to get ahead of the process. We want to get these hostages out. We want to get a ceasefire in place for 6 weeks. We want to increase humanitarian assistance. And the last thing that I want to do is say anything at this podium that's going to put that process at risk. Regardless, as we've said before, we still believe that reaching an agreement is the absolute best outcome, not only for the hostages, but for the Palestinian people. And we're not going to stop working to that outcome. Now, as you know, the President talked with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning. The call lasted about 30 minutes and was constructive. The President reaffirmed his message on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. The two leaders discussed the shared commitment of Israel and the United States to remember the 6 million Jews who were systematically targeted and slaughtered in the Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history, and to forcefully act against anti-Semitism and all forms of hate-fueled violence. Now, of course, the two leaders spoke about our efforts to secure the hostage deal, including through these ongoing talks today. During the call, at the President's urging, Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to ensure that the Kerem Shalom crossing is back open for humanitarian assistance for those in need. And I also want to take a moment to address the latest reports now out of Rafah, which was also a topic of discussion on the call. I'll reiterate again that we cannot and we will not speak for IDF operations, but we've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. During his call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the President again made this clear. He also made clear that we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome while securing the release of those hostages. And as I said, those conversations continue. Just one more thing. President Biden hosted His Majesty King Abdullah II of Jordan for lunch at the White House. That probably wrapped up here just recently. They discussed the strong partnership between the United States and Jordan. They also spoke about the situation in Gaza, of course, including efforts to secure the hostage deal and to get more humanitarian assistance into the civilians of Gaza. Now, we're going to have a more detailed readout of that conversation here very, very soon. Just don't have it right now, but you'll be seeing it shortly.
Good. Thank you.
As far as you can tell, which proposal did Hamas accept?
I'm not going to get into that, Steve.
And is the issue over how long a ceasefire would last?
Again, you're asking me for the parameters around the response and the deal itself, and I'm just not going to do that.
Lastly, Israel has called on people in Rafah to evacuate. Does that presage a full-scale assault? What are we seeing?
As I said in my opening statement, I'm not going to speak for IDF operations or their military intentions and plans. They should be the ones to answer those kinds of questions. What I can only reiterate is that we've been consistent, and the President was consistent again this morning, that we don't support ground operations in Rafah that would put the majority or even any of the civilians there at any greater risk. We want to see their safety and security allowed for and factored in.
Noting your caveats at the top, are you able to say whether Hamas was agreeing to something that had been discussed over the last several days?
Again, without getting into the details of it, and Director Burns is still talking to partners about this, there have been ongoing negotiations and talks here for weeks. And the director traveled recently to see if we can't bring this thing home. And again, without speaking about the details of the response by Hamas, I think it's safe to conclude that that response came as a result or at the end of these continued discussions that Director Burns was part of.
And when do you think you'll have a better sense of what is happening? When will you get a readout from Director Burns? Later today, early tomorrow?
I don't know. The President has been briefed on the response. He's aware of where the situation, where the process is. What you're asking me is like, when are we going to get like a final,
What is the answer?
final table slap here? There's a process that has been worked in the past and will be worked this time. You get a response by Hamas. We're going to have to evaluate that. We're going to see what's in it. Certainly, the Israelis must have a chance to look at this and to evaluate it. and Director Burns, as we speak, literally as you and I are talking, are having these conversations with partners in the region. It would be great. I'm sure we'd all like to have an answer as soon as possible, but I just don't want to get ahead of that process.
And a quick follow-up on the readout. When do you expect the Kerem Shalom crossing to reopen, or is it already reopening?
It should be open very, very soon. Prime Minister Netanyahu committed to opening it on the call this morning. So at 2:30, is it open? I don't know. But he assured the president that it would be reopened. It had been closed for several days.
And one more. Cindy McCain, the executive director of the World Food Program, said over the weekend that northern Gaza is in a, quote, full-fledged famine. Is that the assessment of the U.S. government as well?
The UN has not declared a famine in Gaza writ large, but I don't want to understate the degree of need here and the dire situation that so many people in Gaza are in, particularly with respect to food and water. So it is not a great situation, clearly, and that's why, again, we're working so hard to get this deal in place so we can keep that humanitarian assistance up at a higher level.
Thank you.
I understand you don't want to get into the specifics here, but is it your understanding that this is Hamas's final offer? I mean, is there still room to negotiate here?
I think it's going to depend on our evaluation and the Israelis' evaluation of the response and where we go from here.
And as Steve mentioned, the Israelis are already warning people to evacuate Gaza. If they do go through with this operation, is the U.S. willing to consider putting limits or conditions on aid to Israel?
I won't get ahead of where we are right now, Mary, in the process here. And I'm certainly not going to speak to hypothetical operations that haven't happened yet. So I think we just have to see what transpires. The president was very direct and consistently so this morning, that we don't want to see major ground operations in Rafah that put these people at greater risk.
But a month ago, the administration did make clear that the U.S. would change its approach, right, if Israel didn't take significant steps to address the humanitarian crisis.
That's
Does
right.
that still hold? Is it possible that the U.S. could change course if the humanitarian process isn't improved?
Of course.
And
We always
presumably
we always have the right to adjust our policies as appropriate, and that has not changed, no.
And presumably an operation in Rafah would jeopardize steps to address the humanitarian
All I
crisis.
can say is we've been very direct and very consistent in our views of concerns about operations in Rafah.
Does the U.S. currently have any sense of whether Israel is inclined or not inclined to accept this deal?
I won't speak for the Israelis.
When the president and the prime minister spoke earlier today, was this specific framework discussed, and did the president encourage or pressure on the prime minister to accept this framework?
You're talking about what Hamas says they responded to. So just so you have the tick-tock here, when they were talking this morning, we did not have news that Hamas had responded. So that news broke after the call. That said, as I mentioned in my opening statement, of course they talked about the hostage deal and the importance of getting it secured.
So you're saying when the two leaders spoke, Hamas had not yet
It would be
accepted
wrong.
this framework?
Yeah.
The president would not have specifically asked the prime minister to potentially
It would be
accept
wrong
this?
for you to conclude that the call this morning was about having the Israelis accept the Hamas response. The Hamas response hadn't happened yet.
Did he broadly encourage the prime minister to get yes to some sort of deal?
As he has consistently with Prime Minister Netanyahu, urged that we get this deal secured. But it wasn't a pressure call. It wasn't about twisting his arm towards a certain set of parameters. Director Burns is in the region having these conversations with the Israelis, the Qataris, the Egyptians, as we speak, and that's the forum for working out the parameters of it. But the president clearly talked to the prime minister about the importance of getting a deal done. Yeah.
And John, what is the president's position on a limited operation into Rafah?
I don't think I can answer it any differently than I did with Mary. We've been very clear that we don't support a major ground operation in Rafah, operations in general that put at greater risk the more than 1 million people that are sheltering there. And the question right now is a hypothetical. I mean, we're aware they drop leaflets. We're aware that they're warning people to evacuate. I let them speak to their operations and to their intentions. Nothing's changed about where we are with respect to operations in Rafah that could put those people at greater risk.
Right, but you know that they are asking people in the area to evacuate, and the possibility of a limited Rafah operation is on the table. So I'm asking, does the president believe that Israel can execute a limited operation into Rafah while adequately protecting the lives of civilians there?
The president doesn't want to see operations in Rafah that put at greater risk the more than 1 million people that are seeking refuge there.
So you wouldn't support a limited operation into Rafah?
I think I've answered the question.
Francesca. Picking up on the timeline, so prior to Hamas saying that they accepted this proposal, what, as you understood them to be, were the sticking points for either Hamas or the Israelis in the deal that had been on the table?
I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, did it involve Rafah in any way?
I'm not going to talk about the parameters of the proposal that was worked before this Hamas response, and I'm certainly not going to talk about the response right now. I mean, I do understand the curiosity, and you guys are all asking exactly the right questions, all very fair. But I really do hope you understand that the last thing I would ever want to do from this podium is say something that could put this very sensitive process at greater risk. We are at a critical stage right now. We got a response from Hamas. Now Director Burns is working through that, trying to assess it, working with the Israelis. I mean, my goodness, folks, I don't know that it gets any more sensitive than right now. And the worst thing that we can do is start speculating about what's in it.
And one more thing on Rafah. What was your understanding why the Israelis were only evacuating part of Rafah at this time?
You'd have to talk to the Israelis.
Go ahead, Danny.
Thanks, Green. Thanks, Admiral. You've previously said several times that the ball is in the court of Hamas at previous stages of negotiations. Would it be fair to say now that the ball is in Israel's court?
It's going to depend on what the response actually says and the conversations that we have with the Israelis about where we go from here.
And just one other thing, if I can ask, I mean, do you have any sense that Israel is currently using this threat or the start of an operation in Rafah as a means of putting pressure on Hamas at this stage of the negotiations?
Again, you have to talk to the Israelis about their intentions.
Frank.
You said that you did not know the news during the call, but were you surprised was the White House surprised by Hamas saying that they've reached a deal or agreeing to the agreement?
It wasn't like we had a heads up about it. We knew that, as I said publicly, they had a proposal in front of them, and I was just reminded of the fact that I said many times it was the ball was in Hamas's court. So we certainly knew that they had it before them, and we were waiting on word. We had hoped that there would be word very, very soon. We certainly hoped that there could be word today, but did we know the exact moment that Al Jazeera was able to break the news that Hamas had a response? No, we didn't predict that particular moment.
Are you encouraged that you are at this sensitive point? You've been talking about it's a very sensitive point, it's important.
We'll be encouraged when we get a deal in place and we can start seeing hostages get back with their families. That'll be encouraging.
And if I can, what role, if any, do you feel like the leaflets and the pressure of an evacuation or the announcement of evacuating, do you think that had any role in triggering Hamas to do?
I don't think we know that.
John, can you talk a little bit about the timeline as the administration understands it of those evacuations? How much time do people have to leave? Did you guys put any demands on the Israelis in terms of how those evacuations are to take place under the parameters that you guys have talked about?
We're asking questions of the Israelis about what their intentions are here and what the larger purpose of this evacuation is, and sort of where they're wanting to go. I think to answer your question, though, you'd really have to go to the Israelis and to speak to their military operations and plans. I'm not going to get ahead of that. But are we curious about the timing and the intent and where they're going? Yes, absolutely. And the president expressed our curiosity about that on the call today.
But more than curiosity, are you expressing what you want to see happen in terms of those evacuations, how they take place, whether Israel is prepared for people moving around within?
I would just say, again, without, I don't want to get ahead of operations that haven't happened. I don't want to speak for the Israeli military. I can just say that we don't want to see operations in and around Rafah that make it harder for the people that are seeking refuge there and shelter to be safe and secure. And we have made that case privately to the Israelis. The president did it again today with the prime minister directly. We certainly made it publicly. We've been very, very consistent about that.
Good, Jackie.
Hey, Ukraine. John, noting everything that you've said about the concerns expressed by the U.S. about the risk to Palestinians in Gaza with a full-scale operation, is the U.S. still aligned with Israel in its intention to eliminate the terrorist threat posed by Hamas?
Of course.
And is there any feeling that Hamas may be trying to trick the public in some way. You heard Israeli officials commenting on this latest proposal as a trick, and there's been a lot of pressure to. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, sorry. I'm listening.
Well, there's been, pressure on the administration to make sure that the needs of Palestinians are being served, and that the U.S. support for Israel isn't, overhanded. And you had the report come out earlier today, or maybe yesterday, that the U.S. was potentially weighing withholding an arms shipment to Israel. Is there any concern that Hamas was trying to capitalize on that public pressure and, play a trick, as Israeli officials put it?
I mean, I don't think there's any possible way I could answer that question unless I got between the ears of Mr. Sinwar, and that's a place I really don't want to be. I think that is a great question for him. It's interesting. I stand up here and answer questions. Karine does. Matt Miller at the State Department, Pentagon colleagues, the President does. Prime Minister Netanyahu does, and the IDF military spokesman does. You know who hasn't answered a single question about his intentions and what games he might be playing or where he intends to take this? Mr. Sinwar, the head of Hamas. And I think it's high time that he answers some of these questions and he come clean about what his intentions are. I don't know. All I know is we've got a response. Bill Burns is looking at that response. He's talking to the Israelis about it, and we'll see where this goes. Hopefully, whatever's in this thing, hopefully it can lead to those hostages getting out real soon with their families where they need to be. And as each day passes, their lives get further at risk. So time is really of the essence here.
Well, noting your answer, is it still a good idea to try to negotiate with terrorists then?
It's not like we sit down pie in the sky and say, hey, today's a good day, let's negotiate with terrorists. You got to negotiate with who you got to negotiate to get people back with their families. So frankly, if there's a better idea to get those hostages home with their families, I think we'd love to hear them. I just don't think there's another way to do it. There's no other way to do it, quite frankly. You got to negotiate through Qatar with Hamas to get those folks back with their families. I mean, that's the hard work of diplomacy. Sometimes it means you got to sit across the table from some really bad folks that you'd rather not have to talk to, but they got those hostages and we want them back.
But the U.S. backs Israel's intention to eliminate Hamas.
We, of course, back their right and responsibility to go after the Hamas threat, to eliminate that threat. Now, look, Jackie, I've said many times here, you're not going to eliminate an ideology through military operations. But does Israel have a right and responsibility to eliminate a threat that they suffered on the 7th of October? 100%, absolutely they do. And we've been nothing but very steadfast on that.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, John. Speaking about a TikTok, what prompted this morning's call?
I think you've heard me say many times they talk as appropriate. And given where we were in the hostage deal negotiations, given where we were with humanitarian assistance and Kerem Shalom being shut down for several days, certainly given where we were with expectations in Rafah, this made all the sense in the world for today to be the day that the President and Prime Minister Netanyahu speak.
But when exactly was the call set up? Was it this morning? Was it yesterday after the rocket attack that killed the 3 Israelis? Or what?
I would tell you the initial planning for the call took place late in the weekend, is about what I'd say.
And one more on a different topic. Why did the U.S. halt an ammunition shipment to Israel last week?
Yeah, look, I've seen the press reporting on this. All I can tell you is that, to Jackie's question, our support for Israel's security remains ironclad, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of one shipment over another.
NBC is reporting that it included 2,000 palm bombs that may have been used in Rafah. Did concerns over Rafah and what the Israelis could use this ammunition for, did that play any role in halting that shipment?
Don't have a better answer for you other than the one I just gave you.
I just want to go with that question one more time. Did the United States put a pause on an arms shipment to Israel? Is that reporting correct?
I'm not going to confirm that reporting.
Okay. Just on another topic. Well, same topic, different question. Over the weekend, the Queen of Jordan said in an interview that the United States is giving the world mixed messages and offering both expressions of concern and support for Gaza, in addition to providing arms to Israel. Can you comment at all on this, on her criticism or her critique of the United States position?
I'm not gonna. I don't think it'd be appropriate to get into a back and forth here from the podium on this. We have said that two things can be true at once, and they are. Israel has a right and a responsibility to defend itself, and we're going to continue to provide for their security and help them with that. And at the same time, they have a right and an obligation to be careful about civilian casualties and getting more humanitarian assistance in. And that's why we're working so hard on this hostage deal. And that's why the President and the United States continue to lead the world in terms of actually making a difference in that outcome, making life better for the Palestinian people. No other country is doing more than the United States to try to increase that assistance and get this ceasefire in place.
And just really quickly, the Israelis stopped broadcast of Al Jazeera over the weekend. Can you comment on whether that's an appropriate action for a United States ally?
We don't support that action. As we said very clearly on World Press Freedom Day on Friday, I know Karine talked about this, the work of independent journalism around the world is absolutely vital. It's important to an informed citizenry and public, but it's also important to help inform the policymaking process. So we don't support that at all.
And did the president bring it up at all in his call?
The focus of the call was on the hostage deal and on Rafah.
I'm going to give it to
But
Al
you saw
Jazeera.
I think I put a statement out this morning on that, so we have officially reacted to it.